to the recording of part 1. It's on our YouTube channel. I will send the recording of this session and the slides that Kasara uses. For those of you who don't know me, and I think most of you guys do, I'm Cindy Olson, founder of the Executive Strategic Alliance, and then in a past life, CHRO of Enron. If you guys would ask questions and put them in chat, and I'm going to actually monitor the chat for Kasara. I thought we had 3 guest executives, which we'll talk about in a minute, but we may only have 2 that are going to answer questions. But really encourage you guys to ask questions, because I think Kasara is going to hit on some things that are really interesting and different from some of the AI conversations that you've seen before. And then we'll follow up with an email. I'll follow up with an email that sends the deck that she uses and the recordings as well. So just a little bit about ESA. As you guys know, we've worked with ADP for the last 9 years to build this executive community of nearly 3,000 participants in 20 cities. And we deliver thought leadership and exposure to innovative technologies that are shaping the future of work. And we're unique in that we bring CHROs, CIOs, CFOs in some case, but all work tech executives together, because everyone has to work in lockstep to be able to deliver the kind of employee experience that's so critical today. We also offer a board positioning membership, and it provides many of the resources that an executive needs to be able to find their perfect board seat, be it a public board, a private board, or a startup board. So check out our website. We'd love to have you join us. Today, I'm excited to welcome back Kasara Weinrich. And as I mentioned before, this is part 2. Part 1, she blew it out of the park, and everybody was so excited about that kind of information that she was sharing. She had too much information for one session, so we decided to add a part 2. She's the designer of sales technology and AI solutions for ADP, and she was previously a future of work consultant for ADP, advising the C-suite on macro trends impacting organizations. She has an MBA, she's an adjunct professor, she's amazing. We also have 2 guest executives. I thought we had 3, but we have 2. Megan Barnes, who is the Chief People Officer for the U.S. for the ACM group. Did I pronounce that right? Hopefully, ACM group?
ACM.
Okay, ACM group. And Carl Johnson, who leads strategic initiatives for Mars. And Doug Kolka was supposed to be on this. He's the CIO, CTO of Tyson Foods, and hopefully he joins us. But if he doesn't, like I told these guys, all of our guest executives have other jobs. So that comes first. So I'm sure he got pulled into something. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can take it from there, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cindy. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So please do give me a thumbs up or a head nod if you can see it. All set? Awesome. Thank you all. Okay, so I kicked off our last session with some of this data, but I think it's important to come back to it. And as soon as I cover these metrics, I am going to pass it over to Carl and Megan to give an even deeper introduction of themselves. And really quickly, I think another important element, so yeah, I have an MBA core in predictive and prescriptive analytics. I have my undergrad degree is actually in communications. I wanted to be a war journalist, fun fact. And now I'm studying anthropology and artificial intelligence in a PhD program. And so much of my lens, how I'm viewing this current technological revolution is shaped by those various experiences, right? I'm incredibly curious. I have the quantitative lens, and now I am still very focused on the qualitative side of the data too, right? So not just the data points, but the stories behind the data points. And I think that they're telling a very different story than maybe what we anticipated around this revolution and the speed to its impact and the overarching impact that it's going to have. And so you see the data points here. at the end of the 20th century, the average time to widespread adoption of technology was 15 years. And in just 26 years from now, it's expected that it's going to be 2 years to widespread global adoption. So what once took 15 is now going to be exponentially increased when it comes to technology. And so global AI adoption, though, we're already seeing that it's doubled in the past 5 years of organizations and really people using these emerging technologies within their functions. And early adopters of these technologies are seeing really meaningful outcomes, specifically right now when it comes to profitability. But we're going to talk a little bit later around the fact that profitability is a metric. It's, of course, a very important metric to track. But when you go a little bit deeper into all of the ways in which profitability can be driven at an organization, we are going to look at some other metrics for success to ensure that this next evolution in technology is a sustainable one. So I'm going to pause. And Carl, Megan, I would love if the two of you could also do a deeper introduction of yourselves before we dive into the rest of this content.
Carl, do you want to go first? You would like me
Go ahead, Megan.
Okay, very good. As Cindy mentioned, my name is Megan Barnes. I'm the Chief People Officer for the United States for KCM Group. It is a global healthcare services industry. So we have two key lines of business, and that is healthcare staffing across the globe and healthcare services. Being in healthcare services varies from country to country, but what we are building out in the United States is going into healthcare, like health risk assessments, and partnering with companies to do health risk assessments for the older population to help do preventative medication and preventative care. In our UK business, we have a preventative diabetes program that has a 78% success rate. And so we will get to that in the US in time. We are building that line of business out in the last 2 years in the US. And so it's exciting times for us. We are in all of the UK, we are in Australia, and we are in the US, and we intend to expand further in the next 5 years. So one of our key strategic priorities in the organization is AI. So I'm glad to be here today and get to talk about it. I've been in HR for 20-ish years, and I'm excited to be a part of the conversation. So.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, Carl Johnson here. Hello, everybody. I'm lead up what's essentially a consulting group within Mars. We call ourselves the Strategic Capabilities Practice. And really where we play tends to be when there are shifts in strategy, when there are transformations that are occurring. And the group does a bit of management consulting, but really where most of our work resides is helping business leaders redesign their operating model, redesign their organization, understand where technology, skills, processes, et cetera, need to come into alignment to deliver their strategy. Mars, you may know Mars, most people know Mars by our candy products, by Snickers and Twix and Wrigley. What's interesting is the biggest part of Mars is actually our veterinary health system. Mars is the largest provider of health services to pets in North America. And 90,000 of our 160,000 employees live in that service side of our business, that service business model. Whereas we do have CPG and pet as well, which is what we call pet nutrition. So those would be pet foods like Iams and Pedigree. So it's a pretty interesting company that spans a few different spaces. It's about 57 billion in size. We just acquired basically half of Kellogg's here recently, which is an interesting proposition for us going forward. All of their cereal brands outside of the North America and some other parts of their business. So glad to be here today.
Congratulations on that acquisition. Sounds like maybe your group might be focusing on some change management here, consulting potentially, right? That's awesome. Awesome. So again, I talked a bit about this in the last session, but I do think that this is an incredibly important element of artificial intelligence history to consume. And when we think of the trajectories that AI has taken, you know, from its conception and its inception in 1956 at the Dartmouth Conference, all the way through to right now. So you can see here, when artificial intelligence was first discussed, there was a lot of excitement, almost 20 years worth of excitement, with a bit of peaks and valleys depending on what was happening globally with, you know, wars and infrastructure and those types of developments. But in this time frame, there was a lot of hype around what artificial intelligence could do. And if you sat at that Dartmouth conference and you asked the individuals that were discussing AI, they would have said that artificial intelligence would be generally intelligent, like a human being, within the next 25 years, back in 1956. If you would have then asked the folks that were developing Deep Blue to defeat Gary Kasparov in 1997, they also would have said, artificial intelligence will be generally intelligent in the next 25 years. And now, you know, as we watched IBM's Watson defeat, you know, Jeopardy champions and saw really deep advancements in NLP and deep language processing or natural language processing and deep learning, and you talk to those developers, they too would have said, hey, this technology will be generally intelligent in the next 25 years. So we've always been, I guess, kind of 25 years away from these advancements in technology, but I can confidently say that this is the closest we have ever been to generally intelligent technology. And so with all of that, though, you can see there's been peaks and valleys. And you know, I don't want to steal a Gartner term by calling them hype cycles here, but that's essentially what this has been. There's been incredible advancements. So we saw the rise of expert systems, and that pulled us out of a winter. And then we dropped back down, because when all of these inflated expectations hit the market, there was a ton of investment. There's a ton of interest. There's a lot of people that want to be the first or the next. And so they pour a bunch of money into this technology, and then when it doesn't reach the expectations that they expected, they pull all their funding, the interest goes away, and we go into what's called an AI winter. And you can see here, we've had a few of them, and even if they weren't a full winter, it was at least a cold period for the technology, right? And so right now we're at another peak. We've reached another height in this technology, and everyone is incredibly excited, and everyone is putting a lot of funding and a lot of expectations onto this technology yet again. And so how do we prevent another winter? How do we stop another steep decline in interest and funding? And that's by having both a strategic vision and reasonable expectations for what this technology can do and how it can be accomplished, as well as reasonable metrics for the success of this technology. And so I want to pause here, and I want to pass it over to Megan and Carl and just ask, I mean, how has your organization, or how have your organizations thought about this cycle, or thought about balancing AI innovation with, you know, reasonable expectations?
Yeah, I think I like the question quite a bit. You know, and I love that you're bringing this up in terms of this view of it taking 25 years for technology adoption to really happen, because that conversation is happening within Mars. So I would say Mars is AI. We're not expecting a winter this time, but there's healthy skepticism too. And so the way I describe it is, when we're looking at pulling together strategic plans and kind of integrating AI into the planning at Mars, it does fall in line with other macro trends that we track, things like changing eating behaviors, healthy foods, things of that nature that are really important to Mars. And we actually do build in our annual and 3-year looks, in terms of shorter and longer term perspective and strategic planning. We're building in investments into AI, into those short-term perspectives year to year, and looking longer term. to 3 years out. At the same time, I think there is a real similar belief that still exists that it's going to take a while for this to mature. There's skepticism that it would in any way, disrupt our overall business model. But at the same time, there's a belief that we're really on the front end of the wave and that there's going to be further maturation, different impacts that maybe we don't see today, maybe not as long as it took for, prior disruptions like e-commerce and the internet, which really, in our mind, took 10 to 15 to 20 years to materialize. But I think there is a belief that, look, we can see the benefits today, but the really, really profound impacts on our business, I don't think we see them happening until 5 or 10 years from now, as the maturation continues.
I would agree with that statement for our organization as well, Carl. I think we're much more immature in our journey. So this last year, we established our commitment to AI in our strategic planning and are just really in the governance phase of that, establishing our expectations within the organization, protecting the organization's data security, and creating its own internal framework. So we've gone very slowly into the process, very measured. And so I would say we're just at the very beginning stages of our step into AI from an organizational perspective.
And so, Cindy, I mean, obviously we all know you're brilliant, but a wonderful concept of bringing in a leader that has an organization that's kind of ahead of the curve, and then bringing in a leader that is, just getting the party started. And the truth is that a majority of the organizations that I speak to fit more in line with what Megan is saying. They are still, and so I did bring this up just really quick. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we did cover this in the last session, but for a lot of organizations, they fall into one of these three buckets as far as whether they took a more risk-adverse approach, they've just kind of taken a step back and they're seeing what's occurring in the landscape, and they're, to Megan's point, they're doing their best to mitigate any risk that might come up from the usage of the technology internally, but they're not moving forward on any really strategic projects currently. Then there's the folks, like I said last time, that set up a closed instance of ChatGPT and then hit the checkbox and they were like, we did it, we innovated, we're done. And then there's the folks that are, like Carl's organization and like my organization, where there's calculated risk taking happening. And Doug had mentioned when we did connect, I know he's not able to be here today right now, but he had mentioned that his organization, it does fall into that final column, but they're doing what he's calling more of a business push approach and less of a pull. So, when the business comes to him and says, hey, we've identified a use case or we've identified a technology that we need, then he is going down the path of implementing rather than trying to identify all of the different places in which this technology is going to be immediately beneficial, which is, still a strategic vision that falls in line with that calculated risk taking and really allows the business to drive these enhancements and to drive the needs of the organization. And so as we, I very briefly touched on this in the end, but I think it's important to spend time here again. When we think of these emerging technologies, and we're going to dive into different metrics and different use cases, how to identify them, but it is first very important to step back and ensure that from an understanding perspective, there are many folks that come to me and they say, hey, Kasara, which GPT do you use? Which model, right? Who do you prefer? Which provider? Which source are you using personally, professionally? And it's an interesting conversation to have because I have a lot of lenses, right? I want to go with the organization that feels the most human-centered. I want to go with the organization that has the highest quality data. And I work for an organization right now that has put me in a position to have a really high expectation, a really high standard for the data and for the type of technology that I interact with. And so I think a good analogy, I love storytelling, a good analogy in this instance is I talk about the PhD program that I'm in. I enrolled in a PhD program that is almost entirely self-driven, and we have to go to intensives and I sit in the East Coast, so I'm in Northeast Pennsylvania, but I fly out to San Francisco for these intensives. And every now and then I bring my two sons. They're 8 and they are 5 years old currently. And so when we go out there, you know, we're driving around San Francisco and we see the Waymos and we see all of these different types of autonomously driving vehicles in the city. And I'm very confident in any of those vehicles. I would confidently take my sons and myself into one of those vehicles in San Francisco, right? I wouldn't be incredibly picky because I'd assume, you know, pretty correctly that all of those vehicles have been trained on San Francisco. They've been trained on traffic patterns. They've been trained on different stoplights and stop signs, and they've been trained on what pedestrians look like and what dogs look like in a crosswalk, right? All of these different models have been trained on essentially the same data set. And so I would confidently and comfortably get into most of them. Now, if you pluck me out of San Francisco and you drop me back where I live now, I'm surrounded by farmland, I'm surrounded by woods. I take a 4-wheeler down to go and get my mail, right? If you pluck me out of San Francisco and you drop me here, I'm a lot less likely to hop into just any vehicle, right? Because I know that the terrain that those vehicles are going to face here are going to be very different than the terrain that most of them have been trained on very adequately. The data that they have feeding their model is critical. And so when I'm choosing which vehicle to get into in different circumstances, if I'm out here, if I'm in the Swiss Alps, if I'm in a city that I don't often see self-driving or autonomously driving vehicles, I'm going to first consider who is the largest provider in this space, who has the most vehicles in their fleet, who has the largest data set, who has seen the weird, right? Who has seen these edge cases. Maybe I want to know who has seen the goat in the road, right? Which autonomously driving vehicle company is going to safely navigate me around a unique obstacle versus plowing me directly into it. And it's the data quality, it's the data that matters there. And there's a lot of other things that matter, and we're going to dive into that too. But I think it's incredibly important as we're all navigating not only just the different use cases, but the vendors and partners that we rely upon to drive some of these use cases forward. It is really critical that we have a deep understanding of their commitment to data quality, to having accurate and widespread data and a large depth and breadth in their specific field. And then 2, an ongoing commitment to responsibly and ethically using that data. And so when we heard Megan and Carl speaking about their current state, we're going to fly through this part too. But I think it's pretty interesting that Carl has probably around the structured implementation or integrated operations area of this framework. They have a pretty great understanding of what these use cases are and how they can be applied. Megan and her organization, they're still kind of getting some foundational awareness and doing some initial exploration into what this technology can do and how it's either going to impact their clients, their customers, their employees, and so on. So for the two of you, when you look at this framework, I mean, I'd love to hear how you're thinking of AI, including generative AI and emerging technologies. How is it fitting into your organization's long-term vision? Is it a long-term strategy right now, or is it more so a short-term, testing of feasibility and of capabilities to determine, how over the short term it could be applied long-term?
Megan, you want to start, or yeah?
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, I mean, I'd actually say we fit across a number of these pieces of the pyramid, and so structured to integrated operations, that piece, I would say that might be correct in terms of us choosing vendors that have integrated AI into their proposition, right, into their value proposition. However, in terms of internal pilots, uses, exploration, we're doing a lot of initial exploration. So there's both. I mean, there's a long-term view. I mean, we're in. We don't pretend that there's going to be a drop off or that this is going away and that this isn't a long-term capability that we need to consider in terms of our organization. Um, but the initial exploration piece is really active within Mars. And so we've stood up, it's interesting because it comes out, the title of the group is called the Responsible AI Group. And so we've actually got a bunch of internal people. It's a fun way to do this. I mean, we've got the top-down governance. There's compliance and ideas and about using AI within the confines of Mars or in safe spaces and not taking it out into the public domain. So there's that top-down, guardrails. But really, a lot of what's happening is that we've got early adopters within Mars that are going out and experimenting, and they're in that initial exploration phase, and they're charting early wins, but they're also failing, and they're sharing those ideas within this community of practice that stood up. And they're also establishing some of the principles around what responsible use of AI should be, so that it goes beyond a strictly kind of legal compliance view and matches up with the principles and the values of Mars and what we see works. So, and I love this pyramid. I've never seen this before, but there's different ways that we're playing with it, short term, long term. I would say long term perspective, though, is that this is a trend that's not going away.
As you mentioned, Kasara, we are definitely in like the initial exploration phase and very fledgling. So like the most basic, we are literally focused on 2 areas at this moment, so it's easy to speak to. We are doing resume creation for people that apply into our portals, and we are doing job matching. And so it's really like basic entry points. We are doing a bit of just technological catch up in general as an organization. And so that allows us the opportunity to kind of just dive in a little bit faster from an onboarding perspective and using external tools that maybe we haven't used previously, and integrating external opportunities into our systems to help drive to a point of our goal being right now, and this of course will evolve as tech evolves, people being able to go in and match themselves to jobs and place themselves in roles and going to work without having to talk to a human, essentially. And we have a balanced model approach to our staffing, in the fact that we want to be able to have human resources available if people prefer that, but have tech available if that's what their preference is. Kind of, this is going to be a poor example, but a DoorDash type of model to get people to work, essentially. And so that's the goal we're striving for. And of course, like I said, it'll evolve, but we are a year or 2 out from being able to even just get to that first goal.
Thank you both. And those insights, I think, Carl, I love that that we can then, so we have this organizational adoption framework, which the reason you haven't seen it before is because I made it, but we have this framework, and I think I love that you're saying, hey, from an organization perspective, we can be, 6 steps ahead in one use case and then still getting some foundational awareness of another. And so not every organization is going to move use case by use case through these pillars at the same pace. And especially if, in Megan's example, if they're trying to build something that's either never been done before, or there aren't many partners and vendors in this space that are thinking the way that they're thinking, and so they may have to build it themselves. This is definitely, not a structure that is going to, have very clear guidelines when it comes to, or guardrails when it comes to, an organization sitting strictly in, because we heard Carl's use cases versus Megan, and yet they're both saying, yeah, we're still in initial exploration, right? So I think it's an incredible thing. And when we look at, so beyond just where your organization may fall, and again, I only want to spend a moment here, but I do have a question for each of you on this element, it's important to also determine what your organization is ready for. And so from a use case perspective, I can talk to many organizations that I'm speaking to right now that first piece, the data literacy, they're just now realizing how maybe, you know, I have a story from a retailer, and this is it's a pretty jarring one, but it's still something that can be applied and probably replicated in most industries in some capacity. But, you know, we have this brick and mortar location where there's an individual working the front desk. And this individual believes that their primary job is to sign customers up for a rewards program and to get them through the line as quick as possible. That is what this person is measured on, right? That determines their success. And so in their mind, they think, if I'm doing those two things well, I am an asset to this organization. But now for the rewards program, every time a customer comes in line and this individual is staring at all the folks piling up, this person decides, you know what, instead of actually typing in whatever street address this customer is giving me right now, I'm just going to put in my own, because I know how to spell my road name. I know my zip code. I don't have to take all of this time clarifying the information that they're giving me. So they might just say their address, and I'm nodding my head, but I'm putting my own address in, because my job is to sign them up and then to get them out the door as quick as possible. And so this person lacks data literacy. This person doesn't understand that how critical that address data may be to determining opening up a new location, or where the customers are coming from, or where to market, or where to send SEO modeling, right? And this individual is not data literate. So they think these two KPIs determine my success, yet their decisions are having long-term downstream impacts to their organization. And that's just one person with thousands of inaccurate data records. So is your organization data literate at every level? That is a key determinant to understanding the success and the adoption of these technologies throughout. Do you have the tech infrastructure? Is your culture going to be able to adapt to these emerging technologies with leadership support and employee engagement, right? And I don't want to spend a ton of time here, because we did spend time here in session one, but for Megan and Carl, I mean, there's a lot of things here that point back to skills. It points back to, you know, evaluating whether your organization has great data readiness and literacy. So yeah, have you evaluated any of these components? And if so, how, and what have the outcomes been?
I'll take this one first. So from a data literacy perspective, it's been a pretty robust conversation for the company on the US side in particular. The organization that I started with was a family-owned company, and data probably wasn't a priority at the time. So we've been doing a lot of preparatory work to be ready to move in this direction, because we didn't have clean data. We've had to do a lot of like evaluation and cleanup and you know, data retention discussions, and you know, what we do need, how that looks going forward. So it's been an exciting conversation to get prepared for it. And in tandem, they've been building the technical infrastructure along with it as we've been doing the data cleanup. So it's kind of fun to hear the different ends, because we are so much more just getting started. And so it's been really interesting. We're really just getting through the technical infrastructure portion. We haven't even gotten or achieved cultural adaptability yet, or even moved in that direction fully yet.
Yeah, I'd say on the data literacy piece, I'm glad that it's right next to the technological infrastructure, because we've done a lot of formal things at Mars, deployed what we call TQ, technical quotient training, which has data components within it. And there's a level for senior, mid-level management, first line supervisors, and for associates at large. And but yeah, the technological infrastructure doesn't work if the data is not clean and usable, right? Yeah, the tech infrastructure around AI, yep, we put that into our technology ecosystem, try to understand where it fits. That's where we're more progressed in terms of AI, because we're integrating vendors that use AI into our technological landscape. The cultural piece, yeah, we seem to be doing pretty well with that. I think an artifact of that is the responsible AI group that I talked about. And leadership's interesting. I think, and I like what it says under the employee engagement, because the leaders are champions of AI. And what we're trying to work with them on is assuaging or persuading employee fear that they're going to lose their jobs. And what we have are lots of growing case studies that show that AI to date has not caused us to reduce headcount. What it's actually doing is enabling and enabling employees to actually move into higher value activities that are both better for them personally and in their career and better for the organization. So there's something about not ignoring the fear, embracing it, and going out and engaging with employees in dialogue around the uses of AI and where it fits within our organization, and then building out, which we haven't communicated this yet, but what we're understanding and seeing, in particular my work and my team's work, when we look at and we analyze the health of the organization, we can see that AI holds a lot of promise in terms of making people's engagement at work better, because you can get rid of some of these menial tasks. The example Megan shared, or maybe it was Kasara, around customer facing kind of sales ops or customer ops type of person, their jobs are better today because we've embedded large language models into chatbots that are answering some of the more mundane questions when people go to our shared services group, so that those people in shared services can actually focus on activities that are of more interest to them and that actually help them graduate and move along in their career development and grow as associates within Mars. So yeah, it's a really nice spectrum that you're showing here, Kasara. I really like this picture. Thanks.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, and your story, I think so much of what you said is wonderful, but the thing that just made all of me feel so happy was when you mentioned that you weren't dropping headcount, and in fact, you were seeing that associates were taking the time to actually be able to improve their careers. And I think so much of organizations, so, if we think specifically of a sales pillar, historically it was, okay, if we need more sales, we need more heads driving those sales. And now it's okay, if we can take the same headcount and just make them more efficient and productive, we are achieving more sales without having to add any headcount, but also without having to lose anyone. So I do think it tells exactly that story, and then being able to push them into leadership positions, or not push, but accelerate and, drive their careers ahead is just an amazing outcome. And so I'm so happy to hear it. And I think
Sarah,
for many organizations, oh yeah,
there's a question that fits really, really well in this discussion. When the question is, when upskilling your organization on applying AI to solve business problems, how do you help accelerate and disseminate the judgment needed to understand the likely business impacts and value that may be reasonably expected?
oh my gosh, it's like, did you plant that question? Because that's this. Awesome. Stellar. All right, let's dive into that. Cool. So that's exactly it. So of course, everything that I'm about to talk to can be dotted lines back to profitability. That is the whole goal. Of course, for many of you, if you have public companies, if you have analysts diving into your SEC filings, if you have, investment quarterlies that you have to deliver, you need to be able to talk about the profitability of your projects. But, as an element of that, many of the case studies that I have seen, that I've witnessed from top 4 consulting firms saying, hey, these are the use cases you need to focus on, and here are the bookings impact, or here are the outcomes that you can expect with all kinds of charts and graphs. Very rarely do I see any anecdotal evidence of what is driving that profitability. It's an estimation of, we might see more productivity here, or we may see, someone sticking around for a little bit longer because they like their job a little bit better. But it's really, what I've seen, almost entirely an estimate. And so I put together just a couple of different buckets that, depending on the use cases that you select and where you're either tapping into vendors and partners and their roadmaps, and we can dive into vendor criteria if, I think we'll have the time, thank goodness. But with that question, how do you measure the success of something beyond just profitability? Because profitability may and should and will come, but it's not going to be the very first thing that happens. Like to Carl's point, they're seeing that employees are not only sticking around, but now they're elevating their careers within an organization. They're becoming more engaged. And what happens when employees are engaged? They're more pleasant to your customers. Then your customer satisfaction goes up, and then you're retaining them longer, right? And we can say all of those things impact profitability. But from an operational, efficiency perspective, you can see that AI can augment tasks, which then has a reduction in time on tasks, which could then, of course, make the person more productive and more profitable. You could have an increased process automation percentage. You could even see that they're utilizing your resources better. So when Carl mentioned that, hey, our shared services folks are happier because essentially AI is taking those tier 1 questions. They don't have to waste their time with something that person could have literally found by themselves. Now we have the AI doing it for them, and they're happier that they're not repeating themselves 10 times a day on an easy topic, which points to this. So productivity increases, employee engagement increases, even just that adoption rate. So if you can track across your organization where there may be low adoption in this technology, there's a really good chance, as Carl mentioned, that that's fear-based. They're nervous that, hey, if I use this, you're just going to use it as another way to replace me because I'm giving it all the information that it needs to know to do my job. And the messaging that your leaders will share on, hey, the technology can do this thing, and that's great. Did you find a lot of joy in doing that thing anyway? Did you find a lot of joy in calling 100 different customers to only have 3 answer the phone? Or is it pretty cool that technology kind of tells you who to call at what time and on which topics, right? It's not replacing you. It's simply making you more efficient so that you can have meaningful conversations and your customers are happier. And then, of course, the reduction in manual labor, again, for many employees, that's a direct correlation, and I'm gonna put on my anthropology hat here for a minute. But for many employees, they believe that they kind of need to suffer through their work in order for it to be meaningful, right? Like if it's too easy, or if I don't have like a lot of friction, then is what I'm doing even meaningful? Like if it's not challenging, does this have real impact? And so reframing that mindset as well to say, you don't need daily friction in order to have an impact on our organization. And in fact, we would like for you to be not frictionless, but to be happy. And so that reduction in manual labor can be a direct tie back to that mindset. And then we've talked about this too. So I want to specifically hone in on the second bullet on this third bucket, the NPS on AI-driven interactions. Now, I don't know if the note that Carl shared about the shared services and having, chat be able to manage some of these questions. But the other element of all of this is that current research and early research is showing that even if we have an entirely AI-generated response, when it's delivered by AI versus when it's delivered by a human, we're seeing very drastic differences in the reception of this, of the statements. So let's say in this example, Carl is a leader and he's using a coaching tool for leadership, right? And this tool can either provide the coaching directly back to someone that reports directly to him, or this technology could provide him with this coaching tips and these talking points, and then he delivers it to his employee. And current research is showing that there's up to a 50% increase in the reception and the ease in which these things are being received by humans when it's coming from another human, even if it's entirely AI generated. And so I think this is another important point of again, assuading that fear is, hey, human beings still want this interaction. They don't want to feel like all of their communication is being done with an artificially intelligent bot. They want it to come from humans. And so something for your organizations to consider as you're identifying and developing use cases, but you can track the NPS on those interactions, right? You can have a team that's delivering, AI-driven insights, or you can have a closed instance of ChatGPT delivering those insights and then check the NPS on both. And then this topic, very near and dear. This is one of the courses that I teach, data-driven decision-making at the graduate level. And so you can have artificial intelligence determine the quality of your data, right? It can look at itself and say, hey, there's a chunk of this that probably isn't relevant, or there's a portion of the data that's feeding this modeling that is not going to have good outcomes, or maybe there's bias here, or maybe there's a risk mitigation factor that needs to be considered. Technology now can kind of check itself. So use technology to improve your data accuracy and your quality, or data accuracy and quality, which can improve your decision-making speed. So I know as someone that works in a very large organization, sometimes it can take a lot of time for decisions to be made. And so when you have appropriate data and insights feeding either the modeling to help, that is a metric for success that can be determined, and again, have a direct tie back to profitability. And then of course, everyone's favorite topic, the sexiest of them all, is compliance. And so there is a lot that can be done from a compliance perspective to, again, mitigate risk, to reduce, to have AI-driven risk reduction, to improve your compliance, because artificial intelligence can be looking for non-compliance. Let's just say you've recently hired someone in a state that has a minimum wage that you haven't been aware of because they're in a different state that you haven't operated in before, or maybe you hired someone remotely in a state that you never have, but that state has a mandate that you need to offer 401k and you're a small business. Right now the technology can say and can show that you're out of compliance, and that saving these organizations from costly fines and ongoing litigation. And then of course, I think when we think of artificial intelligence, traditional AI in conjunction with generative AI, there's a lot here that can be done proactively and predictively. So I have it specifically under this bucket. So predictive needs assessments and determining what may be coming, whether it's globally based on different acts that might be about to be passed in certain countries. The technology can pull all of these things out for us and help and keep us compliant. And so I know, and Megan and Carl, I would love to hear from both of you on, with your organizations. I know you mentioned that you're still in initial exploration for a lot of it, but how is your organization thinking of this? Is it, hey, Carl, you need to give me a business case and tell me how profitable this is going to be, or else Mars is not investing? And Megan, you're saying 2 years until this thing is even off the ground. How can you prove this is really going to have an impact? What are you seeing from a metrics perspective? And is your organization ready to look beyond profitability?
Yeah, I would say we've explored some of these domains, not many of them, honestly. Over on the operational efficiency, we can gauge, again, predominantly in our shared services group, which is where the biggest impact probably has been to date, in part because a lot of that, it matches up nicely to qualitative data, to language, to large language models, and that type of thing. So we can understand that there's ability for more to be accomplished with less in that space. I don't know that we've really investigated productivity increases, this type of piece. I think we're in a space now where people intuit, business leaders intuit and understand that there's a benefit. So quite honestly, we haven't been pressed really hard in terms of even profitability or these types of metrics. There's also another piece around it. It costs money to measure. So the minute you start trying to measure these things, you have to understand that usually entails an investment. And sometimes the investment's just not worth it from a business leader standpoint. So they can intuit a lot, which isn't to say that you shouldn't do this. I think we're very early in the using AI around determining the accuracy of data, checking that. The two places that we're playing mainly, as I said, one is the shared services and the other is in the consumer insights space, because again, there's a lot of qualitative data that AI can be really helpful with, and supplement the quantitative data that we've tended to look to in the past in those couple spaces. So just leave it there.
I think for us, we're obviously a bit further out from being able to measure any success, but we are focusing on trying to create operational efficiency, and there is a plan with that in measuring how long it takes now versus how much time is saved. We have not invested in measuring those times yet, but it is on our roadmap, but definitely something that is being accounted for in our planning for it.
Thank you, Megan. Carl, I actually wrote down your quote, "It costs money to measure." I think that it's an important one, and it's a very true one, that sometimes it requires standing up entire teams that know how to build Tableau dashboards to measure, right? So yeah, I love that. And then two, I think an element in all of this that could kind of tie the last few slides together, I opened up the chat and I kind of reread Mike's question. And I think there's an element of the question where we're talking about business impact, but you're also saying, hey, you know, from a use case perspective, how do you determine where to land? Like, how do you determine where to focus and where to try pilots? And so I think it's all of this, right? So if you have teams that are tech ready, that they are data literate, and that they already operate fairly efficiently and they have an interest, similar to that when business led come tried this thing, or there's emerging technology available, what can I do to get our organization to buy in? I think that's a great place to start. And Cindy, I know that you came off of mute, so I'm going to pause and see if you had something to add before I keep going.
Well, there's a couple questions that I think are relevant here. One is, how are you seeing employee fear different or similar to the adoption of AI with like other historical technology advancements? Is it more pronounced, or is it about the same as other technology, the fear of employees?
I think this one is exceptional, but it's only because of the point in time. I mean, if you were a bank teller back when ATMs were released, you had a lot of fear, right? There was a lot of, like, that was a very specific industry that was seeing advance in technology. And so you were thinking at that time, I don't have a job anymore, right? Which we now know not to be true. It automated some things, but we also saw that people still want to speak to a human in a bank, right? They don't always want to use the machine. So I do think that there is some elevated fear, and maybe more of it too is because of the interconnectedness that we have now with, you know, you're getting it from every angle. You're on LinkedIn and you're seeing about it. You're seeing about it personally on your personal social media channels. You can be watching a TV show, really any movie, any thriller movie that has come out over the last few years has some element of like a creepy robot turning on their owner. So I do think that there's a lot of fear. But I do think that now that we're almost in November, so we're about to celebrate the 2-year birthday, right? Generative AI's release to the world is about to be 2 years old, and so I think maybe we are going to just see that fear dissipate because, okay, it's been 2 years. Nobody has lost their jobs at significant scale, and in fact, it's given me quite a bit of time to learn about these technologies. So yeah, I would say it's elevated, but it's also we have time for it to not really come to fruition and for them to realize it was unfounded.
One more question that's on the topic of measurement that we were just talking about. How might organizations use AI to measure employee engagement on a real-time basis? Have you seen any examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's quite a few ways. There's literal tools. So there are tools that exist in the market from an engagement perspective, and any vendor or partner that you work with or have partnered with in the past, I guarantee they are looking at generative AI in some capacity. They are trying to implement. So if employee engagement is something that is top of mind for you, I would speak to vendors and partners in the space of engagement and talk to them about their roadmaps, because they're using AI and generative AI in tandem. So generative AI is making the insights conversational. It's, you know, from an engagement perspective, if it's dipping or if it's correlated to other things, if it's correlated to maybe low pay or to burnout or to not taking paid time off, you can see a lot of these platforms trying to connect all of these data elements to tell a story. Generative AI is delivering the story. So many HCM providers and many engagement platforms are going down this path, but it opens up a whole other bucket of conversation around where your data lives. And so the more data right now you have in one spot, the better story that their technologies are going to be able to tell. So you all know I work for ADP. If we have a client that has many modules with ADP, when they begin chatting conversationally, when they begin looking at the insights in our technology, we can tell a much better story if we have a lot of the data for your organization, right? And so again, I could talk for a whole other session around data access and what's going to happen there. But I do think that, yeah, step one, tap into your current vendors and partners, and step two, I'm sadly, because of time, I'm going to have to skip this one, but this would be, again, another element of things that I would consider. So the criteria that you're using to determine who you partner with, because 50% of organizations right now are kicking off their process with vendors and partners and using off-the-shelf technology. It's an easier, it's the cheaper way to go right now. And many times, many of you probably already have a plethora of technology in place. If this is something that you're deeply interested in, you could even get on their radar for pilots and for testing out the product and technology and for testing out new features and enhancements, and to be able to dive into what's available and what they can offer.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. Unfortunately, we did this last time, right? Right, Kasara? So you guys will all get the slides. You'll get the recording. And if you've got questions that were not answered, I will send them to Kasara and we'll try and get those questions answered for you. And Megan and Carl, thank you so much. Your insights were amazing. I think everybody on the call probably would echo this. You did a great job. Appreciate it. And Kasara, as always, you are wonderful. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.